Welcome back to the morning show. We're now joined by Dr. Muda Yusuf. Good morning, Doctor.
Good morning, Prof.
Good to have you with us. So you're warning us about this impending, unexpected situation. Let's talk about it.
Well, there is currently a lot of disruption around the world on account of the presidency of Trump. And this is coming on the back of the fact that the U.S. economy is the largest economy we have globally, currently estimated at around 29 trillion US dollars. So whatever happens in the U.S. has a way of reverberating globally. And this has a way of affecting some major economic variables, some of which we have anchored our current policies and our current budget. So that is why we need to spotlight these issues so that you can be a lot more proactive as things develop. For instance, energy prices is a very key factor, especially in Nigeria, even around the world, driving inflation and all of that. Now, with what is happening with the Trump disruption, and the fact that Trump is committed now to bringing peace between U.S. and Ukraine, with the fact that it is likely that we are likely to see the lifting of sanctions, given current scenarios, lifting of sanctions against Russia, and also taking into account that Russia has the capacity to supply the global oil market about 10 million barrels per day of crude oil. So if we're able to achieve peace between US and Ukraine, it will have a significant impact on energy prices, for instance. So that will mean that we are likely to see a lowering of energy prices, and this is a double-edged sword. This could affect revenue because currently our budget is benchmarked at $75 per barrel. This is likely to come down. And this will affect revenue, and it will also affect foreign exchange inflows. But the good thing about, or the flip side of it, is that it will be good for business because we are likely to see a reduction in energy prices, a reduction in the cost of diesel, cost of PMS, gas, and so on. And we are beginning to see indications of that. So it has a significant implication for energy prices generally, which has its merits, it has its demerits. It also has implications for global trade. You can see now we are beginning to see increasing economic nationalism, global economic fragmentation. We are beginning to see the reverse of globalization, which some people call deglobalization. So it is important as things unfold that as a country, we commit a lot more to self-reliance. We commit a lot more to depending less on other countries, especially for strategic needs of the country, like energy, like food, like security, like pharmaceuticals, and so on and so forth. So it's a very big lesson because anytime, even your closest allies can turn their back on you. That is a big lesson that we need to take away from this. So, Doctor, and what that is speaking to is that we need to do a lot more to support domestic production, improve self-reliance. So that is a big lesson.
It's a big lesson, Doctor, and you pointed that we need to do more. But in concrete terms, what do you think the private sector should be doing, and what do you think the state sector, the public sector, should be doing in very practical and numerable terms?
Well, for the private sector, what is unfolding is going to be very valuable for business strategy. Because you build your business strategy around current domestic economic variables, around global economic variables. I've mentioned one positive outcome or possible outcome, which is energy prices. So we're likely to see a reduction in energy prices. I've also pointed out the fact that you have disruptions in trade. So this may, create new opportunities for trade. Because now that Trump is imposing sanctions on EU, on China, and all of that, I'm talking of tariff sanctions. That may create new opportunities for trade even within US. because the cost of imports into US from all of these critical trading partners will make imports more expensive for those countries.
Yes.
So it may create opportunities for Nigerian exporters. I know we have limited capacity in exports,
Yes.
but because we are very entrepreneurial people, we should be able to spot those opportunities that will be created. It could also lead to new alliances in terms of trade, because these countries that are facing sanctions from the US on account of trade may be looking for new partners. That may open up new opportunities for the private sector.
All right.
And of course, the energy situation, of course, it is good for all energy prices, but it may also have implications for macroeconomic environment. Because if oil revenue is dropping in terms of the amount of inflows, it will have some macroeconomic implications in terms of revenue, in terms of foreign exchange earnings.
All right.
This thing could have implications for the private sector. So these things have impact on business strategy. Then for the government, I think what is important is to strengthen self-reliance. Any sector where we have capacity to be self-sufficient, as much as possible, we should discourage imports. We should use tariff policies or whatever policies to encourage domestic production and reduce imports. I think that is one critical thing for the public sector or the government to take note of.
All right. I want to ask a question around that. The first is just to continue from where you stopped. Which are these sectors? You play very heavily, in the private sector, in the business arena, and I'd like to ask you, let's break it down. What are these sectors that have the potential to be self-sufficient without us depending on imports that the government should be looking at? That's one. Then my second question to you then would be diversification for Nigeria. I like that you talked about the impact on our budget financing since a lot is pegged on oil revenue. If that oil revenue isn't coming through as a result of global politics as envisaged, what other areas or sectors should we be looking at? Mining, for instance. I know the creative sector has been in the spotlight as well, production, manufacturing sector. Which other sectors should the government be focusing on, and what should they do to shore up, productivity in those sectors?
Well, first of all, let me say that creating the right kind of macroeconomic and structural environment is very critical for productivity across all sectors. Because we are very entrepreneurial people, one of the biggest challenges that entrepreneurs face are structural issues, especially around infrastructure, and macroeconomic issues around issues of forex, interest rate, inflation, and the rest of them. So these are cross-cutting issues which the government needs to commit to ensure that we don't have a macroeconomic environment that is unstable. That affects all sectors. In terms of specific sectors where we have some good comparative advantage, you look at oil and gas. We are heavily blessed in oil and gas. We ordinarily should be very globally competitive in oil and gas. And there are so many components of the oil and gas variables that we can tap into as a result of what is happening. So if we're able to do that, we should be able to even do more export, because exports should not be only about crude oil. It should also be about, refined petroleum products. And luckily, we have the Dangote refinery that is doing incredibly well in terms of the prospects to boost our exports, both in refined petroleum products, and very soon, I'm told, we are going to have a big capacity in terms of the production of polypropylene, which will reduce the import of raw materials by our manufacturing sector. And the capacity that Dangote have is such that we cannot even consume the polypropylene entirely locally. So there's a big window for exports. So such industries and other similar industries need to be supported with the right kind of policy to be able to boost this kind of thing. Then you have also very strong competencies or advantage in the ICT. I mean, you can see the stories coming from the AU meeting about the role and the leadership role that Nigeria is playing in terms of digital revolution, digital export, digital opportunities, and so on. We have so many young people doing amazing things in ICT. This is not the time to be spending so much importing softwares. You need to look at our bill in terms of import of services, which we don't often look at. Sometimes it's between $10 billion to $15 billion. annually, importation of services. So you can do import substitution, because it is not everything that is about exporting. If you're able to reduce your import, it will strengthen the economy, you know. Then, of course, we have agro-allied industries. See how much we are spending in importation of wheat. What has been happening to all the monies around wheat levy and all of that, that has accumulated billions of naira over the years to support wheat growing domestically. We need to interrogate all of this, because we are spending a whole lot of money importing wheat. So these are the things that we can do. I mean, we are blessed also in agriculture. So these are some of the areas I think we can look at in terms of playing globally and in terms of import substitution. And more importantly, is to look at resource-based industries, because that is where the strength of any economy is. We also have solid minerals. You need to do a lot more to open up that space. These resources are there. What is important is to create the environment for investors to come in there.
Dr. Muda Yusuf, these things have been the things you've been saying since I've known you. And I've known you now, Dr. Muda Yusuf, is nothing less than over 10 years since my days at a radio station in Lagos, and you know. And this has been your message. Why have they not done it? Why have they not listened to you?
Well, that's a governance issue, because governance capacity is very critical to economic development anywhere around the world. When we have issues of governance capacity, it affects the quality of your policy, it affects the quality of your institutions, it affects the quality of your policy implementation, even if you have the right policies. Then you also have a major issue with corruption. You have a major issue with capacity in terms of deploying the right people to the right places. And you have also the issue that democracy itself is creating. I'm not saying democracy is bad, but democracy should not be turn politics into an enterprise, where politics is seen as, you know, a kind of investment where you invest and you recoup your investment. So when we talk about economic reforms, I think it is also important that we begin to have conversations around state capacity, around reforming even the political space itself. Because if the politics is not right, the economy cannot progress. So what I think has happened all these years, I mean, I'm not saying anything new, actually, just as you said. And these are things that other commentators have been talking about. But if the politics is not right, the economy cannot progress. If the institutions are not right, the economy cannot progress. You know? So we need to also get the politics right. So to answer your question is that the state capacity, the quality of governance has been a major issue over the years. You know? And we have democracy, well, it has its pros and cons, but we have been struggling with it to ensure that we also get the right people in the right places. And that is why people have been talking about even reforming the democratic process so that you have a system that will give us much better quality of governance. So it's essentially a governance issue.
Dr. Yusuf, do you think Nigeria should, both the private and public, prioritize a strategy for dealing with the US or move towards alternative options to the US?
Do you mean United Nations?
No, the USA, America. You know, in your article you talk about the
US. Oh,
yes.
Well, the point is that, you know, we are having some romance now with the BRICS.
Yes.
Which is like a platform to also, you know, checkmate the imbalances in the global economic,
actually an alternative,
political and financial order.
Yes.
Yes. So that for me is an alternative, at least to ensure that we don't have too much of a dominant country dictating to everybody what to do and what not to do. So having such platform is very important. But more importantly is to reduce dependence. Because you can see the way President Trump has been addressing the EU, the Canada, recently the Jordanian president, even recently, even South Africa.
Yes.
Talking sometimes with very little courtesy. All because these countries are heavily dependent on the United States. Well, so there's a lot to gain by being less dependent. So it goes back to the economics of it, because economic power is extremely very important, even to influence your capacity in the global diplomatic space.
There's a lot to gain from being less dependent, you say, but it has also been pointed out that you've been preaching this gospel for over a decade and nothing has happened. Is there anything that the private sector can do to gear the system towards independence, profitability, and export, which I think is your desire like mine?
Well, the private sector, what the private sector can do is about advocacy. It's also about having a framework to get more involved in governance. Because there is this perception of politics that is not something that is good for people to go into. It's not something for people who are, who are some finance. I mean, we have abandoned politics to a particular set of people. So I think the private sector also needs to change that orientation. I've seen a few of them tried, but because of the nature of politics, they have not been able to make any serious headway. Because the whole political space has been heavily monetized, so that even for decent private sector people to get in there, with their hard-earned money, it has been very difficult. But we cannot give up. So getting involved, having a framework or a strategy to get involved in governance is important. And we can see the difference, even in states and in some ministries that are being driven by private sector people. You can see a whole lot of difference.
But Doctor, outside politics...
So those things matter. Then the second major point is policy advocacy. We should do more advocacy. We should not give up. And yes.
No, I was just going to ask you, but outside politics, is there something that the private sector can be doing as an entity in itself? I mean, there are countries in the world that is the private sector that is driving it. Is there a scope for that in Nigeria, or is it just an utopia?
You see, the private sector cannot operate in a vacuum. If the environment is suffocating, the private sector will not play that kind of role. That is why what we said about influencing policy, influencing the institutions, influencing government priorities is the number one thing that the private sector should do. In terms of entrepreneurial capacity, we are doing extremely very well. Even in spite of all the challenges, you can see what the Nigerian private sector has been doing. You can see the heat. Even where the foreign investors cannot stay, the private sector people that are indigenous are staying there.
Yes.
They are taking the risk. Mm-hmm. But there is so much you can do if the environment is not supporting you.
Absolutely.
And there is so much you can do, to influence policy. The private sector doesn't design policy.
Absolutely.
The private sector is not the one to create security.
Yes, sir.
No, so these are some of the issues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muda.
To the issue of the environment.
Yes. Thank you for making a case and continue to push in for providing an enabling environment for the private sector to thrive here in Nigeria. Thank you so much, sir.